as I was just introduced, I'm Fergus, work at UM, and I'm an MFA 5+ committee member. The questions that we'll be asking the panel today are actually a distillation of the questions that everyone sent in, so thank you for that. And they're bucketed in three main groups. So we have the long-term mindset, leadership, and then our stories. We're hoping to have time to throw to the audience for questions, and if you do ask a question, you can get a copy of Paul's great book, The Dreaming Path. So without further ado, I'll ask the first question. This question's to all of the panel to answer. So based on the fact that these events are all about learning, we want to know one thing that each of you learned from the presentations you saw today and how you can bring that to your leadership. So Julie, did you want to start?
Yeah, for sure. I've had the privilege of listening to Paul twice now, and it's amazing how you pick up new things even though you've heard the presentation before. But the one thing that has really resonated with me is leaving tracks for others to follow. I often get called a bit of a polar bear, and that I look after my cubs, which are my team members, you know, and that was a very affectionate way that one of my previous bosses spoke to me. But I am instinctively quite nurturing, and I've even had feedback to say, you know, Julie, you probably need to sort of let your team, you know, actually go through a few things. You don't have to protect them all the time. But I really resonate with leaving tracks because I get a lot of enjoyment seeing my team do really well. I love that.
Great, thank you. Paul?
The old people say, the minute I stop learning, I might as well go and sit under a tree and die because there's no point. So learning is continuous and never ends. And as Julie said, learning isn't just about formal learning. I've done a lot of that, but as I've also shared with you, my greatest learning comes from my old people. But I learn in the cafes, I learn from children, I learn from nature. In fact, the old people say that there's a big story that says nature, everything in nature are our brothers and sisters, the trees, the fish, the birds. And they say if you really want to learn, go and sit out in bush and be quiet, and that's where the really powerful learning will come. So learning is continuous, and so it is today. So listening to Julie and listening to the other speakers, the thing that I've really had reinforced to me is no listening is wasted if we search for learning within it. And they all come together. So when I talk about Aboriginal ways and ontology of being, doing and thinking, they don't sit apart from what Julie was talking about in terms of that corporate lens of how we do things. They actually sit within each other. And when Julie and I met over an online kind of video dating, oh no, we didn't want to talk about that, did we? When we actually had the formal meeting with Linda, Julie confessed to me last time we met that when she was talking, she thought I'd be looking and going, what bunch of rabble. And I surprised her because I said everything you said totally overlaps with Aboriginal culture because nothing new is new, it's actually quite old. And so it's about how these things come together. It's not about taking one way of seeing or being. It's going, here are lots of things, what can I do to fit for who I am?
Chris?
First off, I want to say what a privilege to be up here with you two. It feels like a bit of a 10 out of 10, I would say, Paul.
10 out of 10, yeah. Quick learner.
I took two things. Firstly, from you, Julie, around flipping the perspective, as I think I'm going to frame it. Because oftentimes we can get caught up if things don't turn out as we hope. There's a spiral we can go down, which can be quite challenging. And oftentimes, if we just flip that perspective and we use what we have and can do, we can often make the best of a situation. So I think that's really powerful. I took that from you, Julie, and Paul from yours. It's around making sure that story has purpose. So our story has a genuine purpose to it. Because again, we can get caught up in going after growth, going after new clients, going after, chasing those leads as we have to do constantly. And sometimes we lose the perspective of doing it in a way that has a longer term vision, that there's something good that comes out in the end. And that's something I'm definitely passionate about. We have a very loud voice in our industry and a very powerful voice, and something I often say is that we need to use that in the right way. So I took that from what you
Being an academic, I give that a HD.
said. Yeah? All right.
High distinction.
Thank you. So the next questions are really under the long-term mindset bucket. The long-term can be a challenging proposition to take to boards from a marketing standpoint, particularly regarding development of longer-term brand equity. What do you think is the most valuable way or ammunition to have that conversation with a board in the way that resonates? And I'll pose that question to you, Julie.
Yeah, look, you heard me talk about the importance of speaking the language of the business. So being able to demonstrate you understand the needs to hit sales targets, to grow revenue or whatever it might be for the business, that's critical. And I think just really being confident in what you know and your capabilities. I really go in with conviction when I speak to my executive team that, there's certainty in what I'm saying. It's not, we'll see how it goes. It's, this is the principle of ESOV. This is where we need to go. This is why we need to do it. And having those discussions, not just a one-off discussion, but every chance you get, feed information through, feed a video case study through for a brand that's outside of your industry even. I can't tell you how helpful that is. But yeah, I think conviction and that continuous dialogue is really important.
Thank you. Chris, did you have any builds on that from an agency perspective?
Yeah. First off, it's a common challenge and question. I get this quite often, and we usually face into it every year, at least once, for our major clients, and we support them through it. I think one of the things that you mentioned today, Julie, is really a big help when it comes to this, and that's being able to speak the language of who you're presenting to. So oftentimes when we're helping one of our CMO partners with that narrative of going in and being able to protect budget or justify brand budgets, for example, because it's typically around the short and the long, where there's that real push for the money to be spent in the short because there's leads coming through, but that loss of that brand spend when it comes to future facing. What really helps is being able to speak the language in the right way and understand that narrative that can come through, which can tell the story in a way that a board can understand it and therefore relate to it. One of the big things that we've been using that's helped us a lot is, I'm going to use a bit of lingo bingo here, MMM data, so market mix modelling. Basically, the brand's own data. Yeah.
I normally don't understand MMM. I sit there going, oh my goodness, I'm not smart enough for this.
You jump in the bucket.
Try not to use it.
You jump in the hole.
But you're right, like at that executive level, there's certainty, isn't there, in the numbers, and there's trust in the numbers, which I think is critical. So it is a really, really valuable tool.
Yeah, and typically if it can be in your own numbers, then it's better. Obviously theory helps, and competitor spends helps, and insight help, and can be used to justify, but if you can use your own data, it really helps.
Just quickly as well, I had an example, about 4 months ago, and I'm a big fan of ESOV, right, because I'm a small brand and I'm ambitious. And I was going through the region, because I was having a dialogue and some new people had come in and they'd been in the business for a long time. And I talked to them about our share of voice in the marketplace and how I believe in ESOV. And very nicely they came back, oh, thanks, it's really interesting, but we don't talk about SOV because we just can't compete with the likes of Mercedes-Benz and BMW. And I said, well, that's not really a good idea, is it? Just because you don't like it, you don't want to talk about it because you don't think we're ever going to be able to compete at that level. You're not going to discuss it. And she was, oh, well, Global don't want to hear about it. And I'm like, well, it's our job to reinforce it to them and to tell them again why it's important. So I got quite heated in a nice way, on email saying, well, I'm not ignoring it, and I think it's a really unwise decision for you guys to think that this is not even worth even looking at. So you've got to have the courage sometimes to actually say to people, well, yeah, you mightn't like it, but these are facts, and there's reasons why this is important. And if you don't think it's important, well, then don't talk to me about growth. Don't talk to me about ambitions for growing the business if you're going to cut budget and you're not going to look at some of these key metrics. It just won't work. And I think sometimes we're a bit apologetic as marketers. You know, we can sometimes feel like the sales teams or the other teams, you know, not that there's always the glory there, but there's always a lot of certainty around exact numbers and preciseness. And, you know, there is a level of, yes, there is science in our discipline, and we've got to really make sure that people understand that it's not made up, right? You know, there's a lot of people who are working really hard to deliver growth for businesses around the country. You guys need to listen to what we say and not dismiss it and not sort of just go, oh yeah, you know, it's not really that important. We can just cut your budget. You got to fight for it.
Talking about that, talking the lingo, that's really important, of course. But just as importantly, and I know it's in what you're thinking when you say that, you need to really understand that it's an influencing strategy, not a marketing strategy. So when you're with someone that has power, you need to influence them to love what you're doing. So you need to actually shift from you to them and know what's in it for them so that they get excited. In Aboriginal ways, we call it being tricky, which is being manipulative. So you've got to. I used to work with ministers all the time, and they're dumb as dog shit. So you got to think, what is it that makes them look good? Yeah. And it's a bit like the Trojan horse. I'll wrap up what I want in there, and they won't even see it. So I'll give them something that gets them really excited, and they lip their licks and go, here you go. And inside it is the stuff I want to do. So you've got to think about your customer in terms of the person you're influencing.
Thank you.
I can't believe I said that on video.
Julie mentioned that the long-term mindset is simpler than what you think. Why is it that people are so reactive, which then causes stress and work that is less inspiring? Paul, could you answer that?
Well, it's because the simple things are the profound things, and we make things over complex in our mind. We come up with too much analytics. I've already given you today. There's too much data, too much knowledge, too much information, and we fall over it. So it's about paring it back and saying really simple but profound questions to yourself about why am I doing this? How do I do it? For what purpose? And then say, okay, that's the boundary. I used to lecture in economics, and there's a thing called the law of diminishing marginal returns. And it's where you feel like you've got to keep on going to get more, but you actually get less outcome for more effort the more you put in. So you've got to become really astute of how much do I put into this, including my life, so I don't overanalyse and make things too complex.
Thank you. Chris, did you have any observations on that from our agency world perspective?
Yep. So I think what can often happen, as I mentioned before as well, is that we can get overwhelmed and start running at a million things. And if we aren't looking at the bigger picture, then that can seem overwhelming and we aren't moving forward. There's a saying that I have that I often use, and there's quite a few mind sharers here today, so I'm sure they've heard it from me, is that everything works out in the end. And that's the bigger picture thinking around, in the end, it gets there. It might be a challenge along the way, but if you keep it really simple, that if you've got that positive view of where you end up, it can stay positive throughout. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Can I just jump on that with the cultural aspect? This is about risk aversion. When you're working in orgs, most orgs say, I want you to be flexible and innovative, but they don't really mean it. They say, without causing any risk, and that can't happen. So in our way of thinking, Aboriginal people, the destination is kind of important, but not really. It's the journey. And tapping in to the comment about we get there in the end, the thing is the end could be different to where we started, but it doesn't matter. And when we go up a dead end, that's meant to be because we learn from that. So when you do what you think is a mistake, it's not in our way of thinking. It's an opportunity to learn and grow, and it's something to be welcomed and embraced. So as a CEO, when someone dropped the ball, I'd say, oh, wonderful, what did you learn from it? And we'd reinforce that.
Thank you. The next theme is leadership. The question is there a leader that you believe has a long-term mindset, and how has this been beneficial and why? Julie, do you want to give us your thoughts on that?
I mentioned Greg Creed earlier in my presentation, really inspiring. He's written a book called Red, so I encourage you guys to grab a copy. It's, he's a really good thinker. And what I like, selfishly, is he's a marketer, born and bred, or he was just, his discipline was marketing, but he went on to run a global brand, and delivered incredible, sensational results. So he's someone that I think has demonstrated enormous contribution and inspiring. So he's someone I look to, and he talks about actually leading with courage and heart, which, based on what you've seen with me today, is similar, and he's a really good storyteller as well. So anything you see in and around Greg Creed, I encourage you to look at, because he left a lasting impact with me.
Thank you. Paul,
Given our definition is my responsibilities for caring for my place and all things in my place for my children's children. I haven't met a leader yet in the Western world at all. I've met lots out bush, and you wouldn't know it because they get embarrassed when you say they're a leader. They go, no, I'm just walking my footpath. And a really interesting story about that is one old fella said to me one day, he said, I don't get all these leaders that expect people to be following. That's not what I do. He said, I walk my footsteps, what I think is the right way, and hopefully people will walk alongside me. And then we all lead.
Chris?
I'm going to keep mine close to home, and mainly because I often suck at choosing leaders because there are so many to choose from. But the one I'm going to pick is someone that is very close to my heart, which is Rose Hersick. She's our WPP president of Australia, and why I choose Rose is because she has this ability to connect with almost every single person in our business and spend time with them. And I don't know how she does it, but she does. And I feel like that I actually know her well, but that same sense goes across most people in our business at a certain level. And she invests her time in a way that makes you feel empowered, makes you feel like you want to do better for the business. And I feel like that's a longer term mindset in itself, because she's investing her time in her people and in the culture of the business, which at that moment might not translate into growth or into money or whatever. But in the future it does, because people stay, people are loyal, people want to work for her. And I've always felt that from day one. I came back from China. I spent 10 years in China working over there. I was with Mediacom, came back to Australia and started working for Mindshare. And Rose was one of the first people I got to meet, luckily. And from day one it was like that, and it hasn't changed. So she's an inspiration to me.
Thank you. I'll have one more panel question, then we'll throw it to the audience. Question is in the your story theme, or our story. What stands between you and where you want to go, and what does the future of business look like in your eyes? Julie?
What stands between where I am now and where I want to go? Mm-hmm. My mind would be the biggest thing. I think we're only limited by our own thoughts and what we think we're capable of doing. So that would be my answer to that question. And the future of leadership?
Future of business.
Future of business. Oh, yes. This one, I don't know. Unpredictable would be, given what we've all been through over the last couple of years. I think nothing is certain. And I think one of the things that we've got to be comfortable with is being totally uncomfortable and not knowing the answers. And, my husband was talking to my son over the school holidays. We were away and we were in the car, and, my son was quite nervous about going on the ski slopes. He's a cautious 9-year-old boy, which is, you don't come across that often, but my son tends to be quite cautious. And my husband turned to him and said, Henry, sometimes you just don't know what's at the bottom of the hill, or you don't know what's in front of you. And he goes, I go into work most days not really knowing what I'm doing. you know, he said this to my son. I thought, God, really? Is that what goes on in your head? And he was honest. He goes, I get handed these things and I don't know what I'm doing, but I just have to find a way. So I think that unpredictable nature and not always having the answers, having a go, and if you still don't, you know, have the answers, speak to people, and then throw your hand up and go, sorry, I just don't know how to tackle this. But yeah, that would be my long-winded answer. Unpredictable, uncertain, but exciting as well, I think.
Thank you. Paul?
I'm writing a book at the moment for 9-year-olds, and funnily enough, that's the age group. I'm through the first draft, I'm doing the second. So I did a lot of research on how 9-year-olds think, and this is when they become cautious. Until then, they're going, I can do anything. Then they start to realise they're mortal and that they can get hurt, and they start to become really fearful. So it's something I've had to integrate into the book. In terms of my life, 9 years ago with business, I was going to be a career senior public servant. I was on $350,000 a year and big money, and I could do great things. When I realised I was part of the problem and started my own business, my wife and I took a leap of faith and moved back home with no jobs, no income, and $1 million of debt. But we just trusted. And 9 years later, I've got a PhD, a best-selling book, an audio book, successful consultancy, and talking to groups like you about things that mean a lot to me. So that was never in the plans. So you never know where things are going to take you. And in fact, I don't want to drop dead tomorrow, but if I did, I would have no regrets. On my gravestone, it would say, he finally got it. Took a while. So, a bloke I was talking to the other day, who's a friend, he said, gee, you're a slow learner, but I'm happy you got there. In terms of the future of business, an observation is we grew up in the school system competing against each other. Then we get to uni, we're competing against each other. So it's battle, fight, warfare. Then you get into organisations, you're fighting each other for promotions. We're in a thing called the competitive market globally. We're fighting each other. And when you go for jobs, it's a competitive merit-based selection process. It is all doom and gloom because we're fighting each other. There needs to be a way where we can competitively collaborate, where we can share and say, here is the cake. How can we do this in a way that creates efficiencies but creates a lifestyle where we all win and get our revenue and our house and all those good stories? I know that sounds pie in the sky, but competing is such a problem.
Thank you. Chris?
Similar to Julie, around my story, it's I think myself is the blocker and the opportunity. So it's around being able to, I guess, come to that realisation and trust in myself for where I want to go. I've stepped back as well, taken that challenge in my career. So when I was working in China, I was on a trajectory like this and had all sorts of opportunities to go into global teams and the like, but really wanted to make a decision to come back to Australia to build that connection with Australia again and for my family to have it. So it was more of a family decision. Which was hard to do at the time because I'm very ambitious and my ambition was pulling at me to keep going in that direction. But I knew it was the right decision. And as I say, in the end, everything works out in the right way and it has worked out in a beautiful way and we're really happy here. Future of business, I hope we get to be a bit more conscious with what we're doing in our growth because we're in a capitalist world where we are continually going after growth. That's the world we live in. Something around $100 trillion of GDP is generated each year. That's just a bloody big number, all right? It's huge. If you go back to the 2000s, it's more around 60 trillion. It's just astronomical numbers, but we always need more. I think that more has been to the detriment of people and our planet up until the kind of stage we're getting into now, where we are being a lot more conscious around it. And I hope the future of business is a lot more invested in our future for the planet and our people.
Thank you.
Proud of you, brother.
I think we've got time for just a couple of questions from the floor. So if anyone wants to address anything to our panels.
I think it starts at primary school when we start to get bullied for being different. I think kids can be really mean. It happens even more so at secondary school. And then in the media, there's all this judgment where people get put into corners and marginalised. And there's this whole thing of pride historically in Australia where we have tall poppies and we'll knock them down and put you in your place. It has to do with male toxicity. I'm sick and tired of the alpha male thing about, oh, come on, be a man and you've got to be tougher and bigger and drink more. And social media now with female and male kind of body image stuff. So, and consumerism is another big part of it, and you guys need to be thinking about that. Consumerism says you can't be happy until you buy the latest $80,000 vehicle to take you off-road so you can get your speedboat, to get your other things happening with all your rich mates so you can all be happy, because you can't be happy unless you do that. Whereas the blackfellow way, we're called beers. The way the old people talk about it, you throw us a bone with no meat and we'll chew on it and say how tasty it is. And so it's very hard because of our surroundings to feel good about ourselves, and that's what happened to me, and it happens still. And the first and foremost thing we all need to do is to look inward and trust ourselves, and that's why it's really important when I told you we're born in love. You're surrounded by love. You don't have to prove yourself to anybody. I really mean that. You don't have to prove yourself to anybody, but you can choose to walk your footsteps with pride and know every day you're doing your best. All you can do is your best. We all have different skill sets and competencies, and some days we're really rocketing, other days we're not. Take the pressure off. And so the last thing I'll say is stop judging yourself. We have a judgmental society where we're always looking and doing the analytics. Where do I sit? Am I better or worse? We compare ourselves to other people. Stop judging and start loving yourself.
Thank you. I think there's a question just here.
Just a question. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Just a question, I guess, on leadership. What, in your mind, is the greatest quality in leadership? And I guess, secondly, how much of it can be taught, or how much of it comes within?
Well, actually, I'm about to write a book on leadership, and so it's got the 8 R's. But those 3 I talked about there, what are my responsibilities as a leader? And then what are my relationships to make that happen, and how do I do it respectfully? But a leader needs to have vision. You do need to have a vision of where you're going. But I like what Julie said, and I like what Chris said. When I was a CEO, I took a lot of time just to get, and I had 1,200 staff, but I used to walk the tracks and I pretty much knew everybody. And I wanted to listen to their story, and I wanted to understand where they were coming from and their motivator. And so my driver as a leader, I had to tick all the boxes, but that's a bit like influencing strategy with ministers. That was what I had to do so I could get the real work done. My major driver was I wanted staff to come to work feeling good about themselves and go home feeling even better. Rather than wear this badge of honour, I'm so stressed, and I'm more stressed than you, and suddenly this norm of anxiety becomes a crown we wear saying I'm more stressed than you, look at me. And then when people aren't feeling as stressed, they go, what's wrong with me? I should be feeling stressed too. No, it's about having balance. And so work is an important part of your story, but it isn't your total story. And so you need to balance that with all the other aspects. I'm proud of my brother here about his family and thinking about community. That's a full story. That's a good story.
Great. I think we might have time for just one more before we do the group exercise. So, thank you.
Hello, I'm Jen. A question, Paul, you mentioned talking about understanding our story, who we are, why, and what we do and why. And Julie, it was a bit of a side note, but you talked about personal brand. And when we're working out those things and then trying to reconcile that with perhaps the direction or the story that the company that we work for has, or the brands that we're working with, is there a point where they ever come into clash that they can kind of never fit and you feel like you have to walk away, or how do you try to reconcile those things?
Really good question. I think the older I get, the more comfortable I get with who I am and what I'm doing. And I mentioned this when I did the talk in Sydney, but I got to a point after being with a company for 16 years that it was time to leave. And I took a moment, I don't remember the exact moment, but I remember sitting down and I had a little notebook which I've held on to. And I felt this change coming. And I genuinely didn't know whether I would be going straight back into another job, whether I'd take some time out. My son was starting school, so I had images of maybe being a school gate mum for a little while. But anyway, I wrote down in this little notebook, very simple, and I just said, I want to work for a company that I'm proud to represent, you know, and that was really important for me. Because I know myself that if I'm not happy when I go into work and I'm not enjoying going to work, I'm not going to be happy at home. I'm not going to be, you know, it's stressful anyway, right? But that's going to overflow into my family life, which is really important to me. So I'm sure it does collide. I feel very lucky that I'm in a privileged position where I love going to work and I love the contribution I make at work, and then I love you know, being home and spending time with my family. So I hope that answers the question.
It's really important to have goals, but what I suggest, don't make them too finite. So have them, but make them broad. And the way to go, okay, what are my broad goals? When you turn 100, so let's be strength-based. When you turn 100 and you're at the party and you can still hear and see everybody and everything's really good, what is it they're going to be saying about you that you would like them to say about you? Do you want them to say, gee, they worked hard? Or do you want them to say they were caring and kind and showed my way and they led me and they changed my life? So think about those broad goals, and then, and by the way, this is in the dreaming path, and then anchor yourself in them and then do an analysis of where am I now compared to those goals, and is where I am now going to get me there? And the way to look at yourself is a tree. A tree is planted in this soil and it's going to grow into this most beautiful tree, but to do that, the soil needs to be right. So look at what you're doing now, not just your job, but your life. Am I in the right soil? What are the things that give me the right soil? What's missing? What's toxic? What needs to change? And so in your workplace, you might find that it's not quite right, and it could be actually workplace stuff or it could be attitudinal. With attitudinal, write down the words, I choose to. I choose to do this job because it enables me to bring in income to support my family because I love them very much. That will reshape what's going on in your mind. You'll say, okay, I'm doing this for a reason, so I can wear this until I come up with what I want to do. Or you change what's happening in the workplace environment by having a yarn to those around you, including supervisors. If that's not working, sometimes the tree has to be transplanted, so get out. That's what I did when I was the boss of Aboriginal housing. I was just in a poisonous place. I'd already had a breakdown. I wasn't going to have another one. I knew I couldn't change it. So I was grief-stricken and I was sad for a year, but I also knew it was the right decision, and I had trust that I would be taken to where I needed to go, and it would all turn out all right in the end, and it has. So it's not straightforward, but set those broad goals, then do the review. It's really healthy to be reviewing your life, possibly yearly, about am I on track with all, not just my job, with everything, and then what do I need to fine-tune.
Thank you. Thank you to all our panellists for your knowledge, wisdom and insight. I think that's it for the panel. We're right on track, so thank you very much. Thank you.